The Amish people flourish in a world when refrigeration is the standard without the buzz of contemporary technology. By means of time-tested methods handed down through generations, they have perfected the art of food preservation. From busy kitchens full with laughter to peaceful pantries loaded with well-kept treasures, the Amish demonstrate how closely creativity and tradition can coexist. Storing food without a refrigerator might seem like something only survivalists or reality TV contestants do, but for the Amish, it's just part of everyday life and one of their best-kept secrets: plain old-fashioned water bath canning. You have seen this approach in action if you have ever seen shelves loaded with tomato, peach, or pickle jars. It seems easy at first. Just toss stuff into a jar, boil it, and call it good for the day. This is not a beginner's kitchen project, though. I discovered I would not survive the apocalypse when I tried canning peaches at home and produced a sticky mess, non-sealed jars. And, conversely, the Amish have this down to a scientific basis. Like they are setting off on a deep-sea expedition. They meticulously wash and prepare each jar, filling them with fruits, vegetables, or sauces, then lower them into seething pots of boiling water. Once the jars are sealed, they may lie on a shelf for years without concern. The heat eliminates any bacteria or mold spores that would contaminate the food. Like time travel for food, what you eat in 2034 may be the tomatoes you choose this summer. Some canned products even remain fresh for more than 5 years, provided that seal is tight. The hardest part is really fighting the need to open the jars early and sample the products, not the boiling or time. Once I questioned my grandmother about canning once. She looked as though I had just asked her to solve a Latin math problem. Apparently, in her view, not knowing the difference between a hot pack and a raw pack renders one a total beginner. For the Amish, however, canning is a craft, and those jars serve as their hidden supply for lean times or bad weather. Winter storms do not imply panic visits to the supermarket for them. They merely begin cooking after grabbing a jar of home-canned potatoes. The flavour is the real kicker right now. Unlike frozen veggies, which after a few months might become depressing, mushy copies of themselves, canned products remain delicious. The way Amish pickles between your teeth, or how a canned peach tastes like a small touch of sunshine in the middle of a frigid winter, makes one nostalgic. And all of this is made possible without even one refrigerator on view. When you consider it, that is most likely the reason this approach has endured so long. There is no electricity cost, no chance of power outages ruining your food, and no worrying over digital temperature settings. Just jars, boiling water, and a small bit of knowledge handed down from one generation to the next. Of course, none is perfect either. You know just what I mean if you have ever tried to pry open a difficult jar lid. I canned some salsa last year and carefully sealed it so that 2 sets of hands and a jar opener were needed to open it. My neighbour joked I should charge more and promote it as tamper-proof salsa. Water bath canning is more of an exercise in patience than a preservation technique. That is its nature. The jars won't seal correctly until you find the timing exactly perfect. And if you believe that closing the lid more will assist, good fortune with that. At least the Amish have not to worry about discriminating dinner guests grumbling about best by dates. If it's in the pantry, it's excellent to visit. And now, what about wood ash? What then do you do with the dead fire? If you are Amish, you utilise it to maintain food fresh rather than throwing it away. Although it seems unusual, the method of preserving eggs in ashes is time-tested preservation. People found long before refrigeration that a mound of dry, clean ash might preserve food and ward against pests. It is scientific rather than merely witty. Ash is alkaline, which makes surroundings unsuitable for germs. Nor a single bacterium, nor rot. Basic, correct? It is quite ironic, you have to admit. While most of us consider ash as only a mess to tidy, the Amish have developed it into a potent weapon for food preservation. For ages, long before anybody considered plugging in a refrigerator, they have been doing this. And using these kinds of methods makes it clear why the Amish have survived without contemporary conveniences. Consider a messy situation. Still, the Amish find it to be the ideal egg storing option. Each one gently tucked away like a treasure ready to be broken open months later. Eggs are stored within canisters loaded with ash. Not only eggs, root veggies like carrots and beets also receive the same VIP treatment. Giving them a warm winter coat lets them make it through the long months ahead without sprouting or going mushy. The secret is this: patience. And believe me, the Amish have that in great plenty. You have a tragedy right here if you bury the food too quickly or tamper with moist ash. My first try at keeping eggs in ash felt more like an uncomfortable scientific experiment than a method of real food preservation. Must have buried those eggs like I was shielding them from a meteor shower, overdid it with the ash. A month later, I still couldn't even locate them without finding half the ash heap in my kitchen. One learns from this. Moderation counts. Furthermore, not any ash will do. It comes from untreated, pure wood. No traces of a fireplace from your aromatic pine logs. Of course, the Amish are aware of this. They have perfected the elegant minimalism. It's the same type of ingenuity you see in someone creating the ideal pie crust without measuring anything. For generations, ash has been a low-key hero. It was utilised for food preservation by the ancient Romans, and it's still going strong in the kitchens of people who value slow, methodical methods of doing things now. Makes one wonder, isn't it? Why are less of us experimenting with this? Speaking now of conventional methods, the sole thing we are advertising here is a book written by seasoned prepper Claude Davis. Called 126 Superfoods and Preservation Strategies from Hard Times like the Great Depression and World War, it is. We are sharing this as the only generation able to transmit these meals and practices down to their grandchildren or children is ours. Disappearance of this information would be a loss. Our store, or by clicking the link in the description of any of our movies, will discover the book as well as one on herbal medicines by Nicole Elan. Our backyards have fire pits. Instead of preserving eggs, we are toasting marshmallows and burning old receipts. Though the Amish have discovered a method to transform unused ashes into preservation gold, nothing wrong with s'mores. Regarding going back in time, wouldn't it be great if we could bury other items in ash to prevent them from going bad? Like our joints, let me say. If it would stop the cracking every time I get up, I would gladly bury my knees in a pail of ash. Unfortunately, the magic only works for veggies and eggs. Nature's way of reminding us that, although we can preserve food, the most we can do for ourselves is a little yoga. Once you get the hang of this entire ash method, it seems logical why the Amish have continued with it for years. It's cheap, dependable, and has the further advantage of perplexing anyone who goes into your house and finds an egg bin buried in ashes. When you explain it, they could seem as like you have lost your sanity. But hey, they will be requesting your preserved eggs when their store-bought ones go bad. Surely that is how things usually go? Imagine now a future in which butter is a food-saving superhero rather than only for toast. The Amish have broken the code using just fat, while we're all occupied attempting to keep leftovers without leaks. Cooked meat buried in melted lard or tallow forms a smooth, watertight barrier that blocks out oxygen, therefore depriving microorganisms of opportunity to wreak havoc at the party. Stated differently, it's nature's equivalent of Tupperware, minus the lids that tend to vanish just when you most need them. And not just any meat here, staying as fresh as the day they were cooked. Bacon, sausage, and even duck have been known to float in fat pools for months at a time. Admittedly, I felt as though I was starring in a survival reality show the first time I attempted lard sealing a roast. 2 months later, when I opened the jar open, the flesh was so soft, you would believe it spent the past 8 weeks in a spa. Though not as delighted was my family. With a mix of mild anxiety and mistrust, they inquired, "Are we really eating this?" Though I cannot say they were convinced, I reassured them it was quite secure. Here's the thing about fat sealing. It works because no air equals no spoiling. If kept cold, the food stays edible for months, or even longer since germs have nothing to eat without oxygen. This style is about taste as much as survival. The fat holds in moisture, therefore guaranteeing that, given some time, the dish tastes either exactly as good or better. Consider it as marinating, albeit with the further benefit of no expiration date in view. Fascinatingly, the French refer to this method as confit, and duck legs have been tasty for millennia. It's excellent enough for everyone if it's sufficient for French chefs. The nicest thing about it is all you need is a jar, some fat, and some patience. Not any expensive tools. But I'll caution you, make sure your fat is well filtered, otherwise you can wind up with crispy chunks floating in there. Unless, naturally, you enjoy surprises in your cuisine. From experience, there's nothing quite like discovering a stray crumb of bacon buried inside what you thought was a... Fermentation has been around for ages. It's not only some hip item from the farmer's market. The Amish were fermenting food long before kombucha started to be the preferred beverage for those wearing yoga pants. The simplicity of fermented foods is their beauty. Let nature do the job, and you will have veggies that may survive the apocalypse, and possibly even your finicky family. By use of a process whereby bacteria feast on sugars, sauerkraut, pickles and beets are turned into tangy, long-lasting basics. Think again now. If you believe fermenting cabbage in a jar and wishing for the best is as simple as it sounds, there is a delicate dance here. Too much time, and your sauerkraut may smell like it would clear out a family reunion. Not much better than a sad salad. Too little, and you find soggy cabbage soaking in brine. The secret is to let the beneficial bacteria rule before the evil ones get any inspiration. When I attempted making sauerkraut at home, I told everyone I was acting out of inner pioneer. I was not expecting the scent. Imagine opening a jar, and unexpectedly your kitchen smells like an old gym locker, except that locker may be fermenting something delectable. I persisted though, and a few weeks later I cracked it open once more to discover some of the crunchiest, most delicious kraut I have ever tasted under the funky smell. But for days my cat refused to go inside the kitchen. Even better is the science underlying fermentation. Not even expensive devices, just a natural process as ancient as civilization itself. There is no electricity. According to certain archaeological studies, food was fermenting among people 9,000 years ago. That implies some ancient ancestor was most likely building the pyramids while snacking on fermentable foods. Should it work for them, it will also work for the Amish. Actually, fermented foods are the present that never gets tired. The shelf life runs in years, and the taste simply gets better. It's like a dietary kind of aging elegantly. Consider the first batch to be excellent. 6 months later will be much better. Here is some advice though. Label your jars. I once lost which jar contained pickled beets and which sauerkraut. Let me tell you, expecting one and eating the other is really the surprise. Fermentation has purposes beyond only extending food's lifetime. It also relates to culture, of course pun meant. You are keeping a small bit of the past, catching tastes in time, not only food. For decades, the Amish have been passing on these talents, just as they pass on quilts and dishes. Nor Wi-Fi, nor refrigerators, just a jar, some salt, and a great deal of patience. It has also great nutritional value. It is like a culinary miracle devoid of chemicals and preservatives. Still, You may get probiotics in health food stores that surpass the material marketed in little, costly bottles. For those who grew up hearing, "Eat your vegetables," the Amish have figured out the ultimate loophole. Let the vegetables ferment, and you'll really want to eat them. You know those jerky packages people grab at petrol stations? The Amish most likely see that and consider amateurs. Drying food is survival, not only for road trips. Straightforward and basic. The Amish were removing moisture from fruits, vegetables and meats using the sun and wood furnaces long before elegant electric dehydrators were available. Less moisture reduces the likelihood of mould or germs, therefore preserving the food's edible quality for years, sometimes even decades of storage. Ever have some over 10-year-old sun-dried apples? Though, like Grandpa's jokes, a little on the dry side, they are nonetheless really wonderful. One Amish household I visited had shelves piled with jars of preserved apples, pears, even venison strips, all aiming to outlast us all. The dad said that learning to make food last, that is, the food and the kids, would vanish quite quickly when you have 7 kids to feed. And I can say, those youngsters were quick around food. Strange is that some dried foods, if properly, may last for up to 20 years. Imagine finding a neglected, older than your adolescent jar of dried tomatoes in the rear of a cupboard, and they still taste great. It goes beyond just survival as well. Drying food frees weight and space. For farmers, tourists, and, later on, astronauts, dried apples, apricots, and beef strips became mainstay items. Not kidding. NASA planned space meals using ideas from these ancient drying techniques. Thinking I was channeling my inner pioneer spirit, back home, I tried once drying some apple slices on a wooden plate in the sun. A few hours later, I returned to see the tray empty and my neighbour's dog seated there, lolling his chops. Lesson discovered. The Amish know how to guard their food in addition to how to dry it. The secret is to strike exactly the correct equilibrium. Too much moisture will cause mildew to migrate more quickly than relatives after winning the lotto. Too dry. Your cuisine turns out to be, well, a weapon. Have you ever bit into a piece of rock-hard jerky? Should the end of the world arrive, that jerky may also be a building component. Additionally developed by the Amish are the techniques of drying meats in wood-fired ovens. It smells fantastic, not only practical. Entering a room with drying meat is like entering a gourmet restaurant, but the menu is survival. Also interesting is the fact that dried meat was not only for crises. Back in the day, it was also seen as a snack, something to gnaw on while working on barn construction or field maintenance. When you have dried venison keeping you going, there is no energy drink required. You could be passing over your definition of treasure if gold coins are what you mean. For the Amish, a good root cellar loaded with potatoes, apples and carrots is a wealth more than any buried box could provide. Root cellars are like the freezers of nature, free from the botherful hum and power outage danger. Tucked under, these areas maintain everything cold, dark, and just the proper level of moist to guarantee their abundance during the worst winters. Ever wonder why root veggies seem to be unconcerned with shelf life? It's because they flourish in these cellars, where the temperature hardly flinches, regardless of outside temperature. Root cellars maintain a constant moisture level, and cold air stops spoiling like a diligent shelf guard. When I first visited one, I imagined I had strayed into a farmer's Narnia, walls lined with rows of glistening apples like little gems just waiting to be picked. Bins of potatoes. Over 2,000 years have gone had this age-old storage technique been in use. For nourishment, the Romans stored food in subterranean caves. I suppose Caesar would have given his laurels for a couple of those crisp carrots the Amish squirrel away. The worst is that those apples kept in root cells taste better after a few months. Without the headache the next morning, they soften just enough with tastes that mellow out like a good wine. Personally, exploring a root cellar seems a bit like visiting an ancient library, minus the books, but with many more turnips. Knowing that all this food will endure without ever needing a single watt of electricity makes one strangely happy. It's a nice exercise as well. Trust me, lugging buckets of apples up and down those cellar steps will make you stop before you gripe about supermarket bags twice. Thinking it would take several hours, I once offered to help load a friend's cellar for winter. I had carried so many pumpkins by the time we were done, my arms felt like they could fall off. My biceps seemed to be pleading for union rights almost exactly. Better still is how the Amish transform root cellars into communal centres. People stop over to sell goods, provide advice, and occasionally even chuckle at how the elderly turnips in the corner still look better than most of us on Monday mornings. Keeping your root veggies fresh and your neighbours wondering how you do it is the secret to happiness, one elder said me. Actually, the Amish make everything function without the sophisticated tools we depend on. Salt is a culinary warrior that has battled deterioration for millennia. It is not only for flavouring your potatoes. Back then, whole civilizations were based on salt. Roman soldiers received pay in salt as they were loud criers. It makes sense that the Amish still apply this old approach. When you load anything with enough salt, you are waging war against germs rather than merely sprinkling taste. From meat to fish, the Amish salt down everything, piling food inside barrels loaded with coarse salt until it looks like a snowdrift. What then? Since moisture is the enemy, and salt slams the door behind it rather than merely drives it out. Since germs cannot survive without moisture, you get food that not only keeps good, but also ages well. Some salted fish has survived for decades. That is longer than my New Year's goals. Once I attempted salting a ham, wondering, how hard could it be? Spoiler. It was more difficult than a math test. First, the salt permeated everything, between my fingers, beneath my nails, and somehow into my shoes. Then, I miscalculated exactly how hefty a thoroughly salted ham would be. Ever battled a brined slipper chunk of pork? Like attempting to hold a kid in the middle of a tantrum. The ham tasted fantastic and lasted. One drawback. I still find salt crystals throughout the kitchen today. Food prepared via salt curing is not for the timid. Though smoking takes time and a lot of salt, done correctly, it pays off with meat that tastes just as it just came off the smoker, even years later. Pickles are the food storage superheroes, not only friends for sandwiches. The Amish have figured out how to preserve goods edible long past their due date using vinegar. A modest cucumber turns out to outlast the bread it was meant to be seated on. Vinegar has that kind of magic. Foods dipped in this sour solution become impenetrable to bacteria, like secret agents with a constantly available escape route. The Amish pickle everything: eggs, beets, even onions, in addition to cucumbers, of course. Who knew that vinegar could serve two purposes? Salad dressing by day, preservation magician by evening. Pickling is not quite modern. Some historians believe the ancient Mesopotamians were engaged in this long before Caesar considered invading any area. But the Amish, they have developed it to perfection. Here's a crazy statistic for you. An unopened vinegar pickled jar keeps good for more than 5 years. Modern expiry dates seem like a joke given the amount of shelf life involved here. When I attempted preparing my first batch of pickles at home, I learnt a painful lesson. One mistake with the salt-to-vinegar ratio results in either pickles softer than old chewing gum or food that would peel paint. Though my family kindly avoided my pickle experiment afterward, they bravely sampled the first batch. A jar of pickled eggs has something very beautiful about it. Those creamy whites waiting for their big day float gently. Reliable, consistent, and always ready to surprise you at a potluck, they are the gastronomic equivalent of an old friend. Strangely yet, if I were a cucumber, I would register to be pickled. Who does not desire immortality in a jar, really? Funny how basic solutions like this make high-tech devices seem kind of superfluous. And the Amish arrive with another age-old ploy, just when you believe you have seen it all. When one thinks about smoked meals, one may image holiday feasts or backyard barbecues. For the Amish, however, smoking food is a creative approach to preserve their meats for more than 1 year. Smoking is a time-tested preservation technique rather than only a gastronomic treat. It's a sensible decision for the Amish pantry, as the smoke provides a protective layer that fights off germs as it dances about the goods. Starting with well-chosen slices of meat or fish, the procedure starts in a smokehouse where they dry up and acquire all those smoky tastes. Because the smoke includes compounds that stop bacterial development, smoked foods may keep far longer. Actually, smoked meats keep good for up to 2 years when done correctly. That's like having a surprise visitor or a gourmet feast on call for your next family get-together. The Amish smoke fish and cheeses, so you might be thinking, what else do the Amish smoke except the obvious hams and sausages? Imagine reaching for a scrumptious and ready-to-wow slice of smoked cheddar from your cupboard. Here's an intriguing bit. Smoking food is not a new fad. Thousands of years separate it from us. Early societies found that smoking meats improved taste and increased shelf life in addition. Discuss a win-win. I recall trying to smoke chicken wings initially. I was experiencing all the thrill in the world, meat sizzling, smoke filling. But let me tell you, it was somewhat more difficult than I had anticipated. I discovered the true secret for smoking much later: patience, skill, and, naturally, superb ingredients. Oh my, I really do get the too ambitious with the spices problem. You believe you are creating the ideal wing, then it seems as though an army of chili peppers is besieged on your taste receptors. You could be eager to eat 1 minute, then wondering whether you unintentionally registered for a fire-breathing contest. Like the Amish, you must be careful to balance all the smokiness with exactly the correct dosage of flavour while smoking food. Keep things basic. Let the smoke and wood work their magic. And speaking of magic, let's talk herbs. Not only are they a means to make your mashed potatoes sing, they are essentially the unsung heroes of food storage. More than everyone else, the Amish know fresh herbs from the kitchen ceiling, hanging bundles of rosemary, thyme, and other green delicacies like a natural pantry full of antibacterial strength, dry out even if we might buy them at the shop. These herbs are nature's troops fighting spoiling, not simply for taste. Use thyme, for example. It has been in use for thousands of years, even in ancient Egypt where mummies were kept. Thus, adding garlic to your beef stew is not just adding taste, but also channeling a culinary guardian who has been guarding food for millennia. And let me tell you, I discovered the hard way how much wiser the Amish method of drying herbs is than my let's hang oregano in the kitchen. A few days later, I found my cat, my cunning little herb thief, grabbing oregano leaves as if they were her new favourite feast. Lesson learned. Perhaps next time I will make some cat-proofing investments. Still, the Amish approach is different. Absolute brilliance. Herbs become pantry basics that not only enhance taste, but also prolong food freshness. Always available to level off your meal, it's like a twofold hidden weapon. Imagine creating a stew with root veggies you kept from last summer, seasoned with herbs dried months ago. Every mouthful of this is a link to the past, as well as a soothing meal, like a little time capsule in a pot. It also reflects a creative attitude. The Amish reject waste of any kind, from a jar of homemade pickles gently festering in the cellar to a bunch of thyme dangling from the ceiling. They consider everything as a gift from nature. Their practical inventiveness combined with their awareness of the environment helps them to survive without a refrigerator. It's evidence that you only need tradition, ingenuity, and maybe a little of salt to keep food fresh. Modern equipment are not necessary. Not to overlook sense of humour as well. The Amish laughing at the idea of a refrigerator breaking nearly comes naturally. They all seem like, no need to panic, we have pickles, dried herbs and a root cellar. Bring it on. Speaking about pickles, opening a jar of handmade ones has an unquestionably pleasing effect. It's a basic delight. The crunch, the tang, that ideal combination of salt and vinegar. Once I experimented with preparing pickles. Let's say, my pals never let me live down that experimental batch. Some were too soft, some too sour. That is half of the fun though, right? Like the Amish, the path to perfect preservation involves time, patience, and maybe a few blunders along the way. The learning process is unavoidable. And who knows, perhaps the true magic resides in conserving memories rather than only in extending meals. Those family get-togethers, the jokes, the shared cookbooks. The Amish have become really skilled in this, and everyone could benefit from a little bit of this.